Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the major motion podcast, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, film editor for the youngfolks.com. I'm sorry, I'm a little creeped out because Will Ashton from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, news and entertainment writer at Collider. Why are you smiling like that?
What are you talking about?
You're smiling like, I don't know. It's like you don't, no pain.
Well, this is my normal expression. I always look like this.
Well, maybe if you could turn that frown upside down, we can turn our reviews upside down this week on the show.
Turn my frown upside down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Turn the smile upside down.
There you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Because we're going to talk about Smile. That's right.
You did.
And big weekend, Will.
Sure. I guess so.
In some ways, not in other ways. We got to hit it at the top of the show, don't we? Bros.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna be reviewing Bros. Our review is gonna come out day after this one comes out, so it might already be out by the time you're listening to this. Wow. I mean, chances are extremely good. But Bros and Smile both came out. Bros is a romantic comedy, right, from Nicholas Stoller.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a kind of a raunchy gay comedy, right, from the guy who made Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Neighbors. And then Smile is a horror movie from kind of a new director here, Parker Finn. He did a short film kind of based on this. Cinematographer, the guy from Relic, and original horror film.
Yeah, I mean, there's a weird sort of yin and yang going on this weekend where we have the story of Smile, which is this big underdog story. You know, like you said, a directorial debut, a film that was supposed to go on to, I think, Paramount Plus initially. And Paramount tested the film. It scored through the roof. They're like, hey, you know what? What do we have to lose putting it into theaters? Let's see what happens.
Right.
Already outgrossed its budget on its opening weekend.
Doubled its budget.
Yeah. I don't think it doubled its budget, at least nationally. I think maybe internationally it did. I'm not sure.
Internationally, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big success story. And then you have Bros, which, you know, is if not the first, one of the first major mainstream studio films with an LGBT cast. I believe everyone in the cast is in the LGBTQIA plus community. Did I get that right?
LGBTQIA plus is one of the terms you can use. You can use LGBT as a shorthand.
Yeah.
Or LGBT plus.
You know, I mean, certainly the film was hyped up as a big turning point for representation. Obviously, we probably should have gotten to this point much sooner, but I mean, you know, there were a lot of hopes for this film. I mean, not only from the box office, but critically and awards-wise. I think there was even some hopes that it would get some Oscar attention. That's still possible, but at the moment, I mean, certainly at the box office, it well underperformed expectations. Got good reviews, but still is not really making much of a dent in terms of audiences coming out to see the film. And I mean, there's obviously a lot of factors that go into that. I just think the big one is that they released this movie at the exact wrong time.
Yeah, this is not a great time to release a raunchy romantic comedy.
Yeah.
I can't think. I mean, I did a little bit of digging. I couldn't really find any that had come out this time of year. I think if you're going to do this kind of movie and market it the way you want to market it, because I saw some people being like, well, it's not marketed the right way. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I watched the trailer like a while ago, but yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just a weird time for it. It's October. It's back to school kind of season. Right. It's spooky season. And this is the kind of thing like August would have been good for this. Late July, maybe. That's when Big Sick came out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if they were going for the awards-friendly weekend, I don't see why they couldn't do it in July. Like you said, The Big Sick came out in July and crept into August, and obviously that was able to find a few critical accolades along the way, as well as, you know, like a couple Oscar nominations, or at least one Oscar nomination. But yeah, I mean, even beyond that, they could just release this in June for Pride Month.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like Apatow films, I don't think they usually come out in October. That's the thing. And so, of course, Smile did well. It's October. It's spooky season. People are changing their names on Twitter as we speak. But yeah, to what you were saying, Bros made gross something like $4.8 million domestically in its opening weekend.
Right.
We're recording this Sunday evening.
Mm-hmm. I think it was supposed to gross between 8 and 10 million. That was what
they were projecting. I saw 10 to 12 originally, and it might have gone down a bit, but then now it's Now it's 4.8. And then, I mean, it's not a cheap movie, 22 million. It costs more money to make them smile, right? So it's definitely a big miss. This looks like it's going to flop a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? I mean, it could creep, some box office the rest of the month, but I don't know. That could be a bit of a long shot.
I guess, I don't know. I mean, if any film could have legs, I think it's certainly this one. Like we said, guys, good reviews. Maybe people just kind of wanted to see the horror movie first. And, as the month goes on, they have already seen Smile. They're like, yeah, we'll give Bros a shot. Who knows? But, I mean, I feel like a lot of movies this year, with the exception of like Top Gun Maverick and Elvis, haven't really had super long legs. So, I mean, that's not a given at this point.
Yeah, it's tough to predict these days, what's going to catch. And I'm so sick of people being like, well, it's because it's the pandemic. I mean, stop. Like, how many times do we have to keep going to that? Like, of course, it's not the pandemic. Like,
I mean,
no, like, what? No, like, if it was the pandemic, we wouldn't be seeing movies. We've seen other romantic comedies do well this year. We've seen tons of movies do well this year. I just don't get why people keep using that. It feels like an excuse to me. Like, people don't want to admit that it's just people didn't come out to see this.
But I mean, I think to that point, I mean, at this point, a lot of the romantic comedies that are coming out, including Fire Island, which Bros has been compared to quite readily, they're coming to streaming. People are kind of being conditioned to see these movies on streaming anyway, because the studios didn't have faith in them to make money. So now they're kind of, the snake is kind of biting the hand, because, they're trying to put them out in theaters again. People are like, well, I'll just wait until it hits streaming.
Well, and the thing is, it's a rom-com, right? So they expect people to go on dates to watch this sort of thing, at the movies, date night and everything. And I do think, like, I don't know, I feel like some people are trying to pretend like this isn't a thing. But I do think a lot of straight people just, like, don't have, like the desire to go see a gay romantic comedy, even though they should, because gay people go see straight romantic comedies all the time and have fun. And it is fun. It is romantic. I think there's like a prejudice or something like that a lot of straight people have. Obviously not all of them.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, that's, again, like I was saying to you before, I think that's kind of the Elizabeth Banks with Charlie's Angels thing, where she was blaming like straight white men for not seeing the movie, and then they found out that straight white men were primarily the people who saw the film.
I agree, but it's just sort of like, I don't know. I just feel like we're kind of dancing around it a little bit. It's like, yeah, there's just a lot of homophobic people.
Oh, I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying that, yeah, I mean, I don't think the right approach is blaming one sexuality for not seeing a film, because we just don't know for sure. Of
course not. Yeah, I mean, I think plenty of straight people, plenty of gay people aren't watching it, because I'm sure a lot of gay people are like, I don't care. I don't want to watch Billy Eichner's Love Life. It's obviously not one group of people, but I do think that, like, a movie like this has to, like, grab from lots of different quadrants, and that was always going to be something kind of getting in its way a bit. And my takeaway is just, I wish it would change. I wish people would be open to it. But, we'll talk about the movie Bros, but I mean, I feel like most people who watch it would have a really great time.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said. I mean, the movie even parodies it, as we'll probably discuss in our review of it. But people, I guess, when they see LGBT films, they're conditioned to think of them as like heavy dramas or like coming of age stories.
Yeah, traumatic. And
I mean, there is still this, fear, I guess, or whatever it is, that, just showing gay people just living their lives and just having, complicated love affairs is something without, like, heavy melodrama or, serious ailments or something, like, or even like something as heavy as like Brokeback Mountain or Call Me by Your Name or Power of the Dog. Like, there's potentially maybe like less urgency from people to be like, okay, why do I need to see this?
Right.
Yeah. But
that's what I mean. It's just like, 'cause to go see it on like a date night to escape and to have fun. And I think movies are kind of, when it comes to LGBT stuff, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about this on our Bros review coming up, but I think a lot of people in like the film industry, they're still catching up to where the publishing industry is at, because we're getting stories like that in publishing right now. Young adult novels. There are tons of really great queer stories coming out with happily ever afters and with romantic, undertones. And it's not all based around like what you're saying, like trauma and pain. And I think that's where novels were decades ago. I mean, look at Power of the Dog, based on a novel, right? And I think movies are just always slow to kind of catch up to that sort of thing. So I am optimistic. I think we will get there, But yeah, just it takes some time because it's certainly not something people, like you said, are conditioned to expect at the movies, and that takes time to build. And I get what people are saying. They're like, the box office failure of this, it's going to obviously hurt, other queer films from being made, and that's true too, and that's sad. That really is.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope the takeaway is don't release your romantic comedy around spooky season.
The stakes are high if you do that.
Yeah. But, I mean, considering how much people freaked out about, that 3-second kiss in Lightyear, I mean, there is certainly a valid fear that, Hollywood
It wasn't even
will
a
see.
3-second kiss. It was a 3 millisecond kiss.
Whatever.
Yeah, it was in the news, for weeks.
Right. And but there is a very understandable fear that, Hollywood might see all these, controversies and be like, well, maybe it's not worth whatever risk there would be to release a film like this, especially if, a movie like Bros underperforms. But yeah, I mean, I hope that's not the takeaway. Like you said, I think there is certainly an audience for this. I think we see it not only in the publishing industry, but on TV and a lot of other forms of media. And I think, film certainly deserves it. And we have a lot of great LGBT films, but certainly we could use more on a mainstream level.
Yeah, more of a variety. Yeah. Yeah, and I totally agree with that, because I'm pretty optimistic. I think that Hollywood can and will learn the wrong lessons from everything. And it's just how it is. But at the same time, I think things are changing. The next generation coming up, they're going to get more and more buying power. There are way more and more, LGBT people being more, visible, coming out and, wanting that from culture, working in these industries and making those choices to what gets made and what becomes art. And that's always going to be something that's I think growing as long as we live in a society that's free, So
yeah, absolutely.
I am optimistic.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, there's certainly, what gives me hope is that there's much less of a stigma with it now. And there's certainly, I mean, like you said, people are a lot more open, a lot more expressive, a lot more emboldened to be open about their sexuality and their individuality. And I think that's a very beautiful and progressive thing. And I hope that continues. But yeah, I mean, seeing Bros.
Would you say though, Will, that it's enough to make you smile?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about Bros a little bit more, I guess, in our actual Bros review. But if you want to jump to Smile, or I could talk about 2 other films I saw this week. What do you want to do?
Do you want to do that? Okay, we're gonna get to Smile, but yeah, you saw another film, and I don't want to keep it away from you. I know you're excited.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I saw 2 films.
2 of them. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So I've seen 2 films you haven't seen yet, or I don't even know if you will ever see any of these films. I saw Lena Dunham's Catherine Called Birdy, which is going to be on Amazon Prime later this month. And I also saw Rob Zombie's The Munsters, which is currently on Netflix as well as home video. Which would you like me to discuss first?
It's a dealer's choice. I think I have a screener for I think I have a screener for Catherine Called Birdy, but I don't know if it's expired. I do want to watch it though. At least when it comes out.
You know what? Catherine Called Birdy, good movie.
Cool.
Gotta say. Yeah.
It looks good.
Yeah, I mean, I was very curious because I like Lena Dunham. I know people have very strong and very negative feelings about her. And, say what you will about her as a person. I think as a writer and as a director, I think she is tremendously talented. And I think she has a great voice and a style that is very contemporary. And that's why I was very curious about what was going to be like in this, period piece, this adaptation.
Yeah, because you already watched, because you saw Sharp Stick, right? Her last one from not too long ago.
And that was a film that I was more positive on than other folks. I think people have, a variety of opinions about that film. I think certainly a lot of the criticism against that film was warranted. I kind of conflicting feelings about how it portrayed neurodivergent characters. But, I thought personally it was kind of fascinating just to see a film where someone neurodivergent was open and frank and exploring their own sexuality. It's just something you don't often see. And I really like how Lena is emboldened and, willing to kind of explore female sexuality in a kind of unapologetic way. And this film...
Can I say real quick about Lena Dunham? Because I don't want to let it sit. I think I agree with you. I think she's tremendously talented. I also think she's extremely annoying.
Sure.
But I also think that she's kind of fearless. And I don't really like her as a person, But I'm always interested in what art she's making. And I'm always going to give her a chance on something. I'm not going to, I don't huff and haw like her having a career and doing her thing, and just me and her go for it.
Look, let's be real. If I was criticizing filmmakers for being annoying, we wouldn't get to cover half the movies that come out.
Exactly. I wish that was more, because people kind of assume, there are a couple things about Lena Dunham that are pretty gross in terms of stuff that she said, and but
sure, I'm not trying to downplay that. I'm just saying that I think as an artist, people can kind of underappreciate or undermine her very clear and apparent talents. And I think she is pretty self-aware as an artist, and also, unself-aware in some respects as a person and sometimes as an artist. And I think that actually makes the work more intriguing more often than not. But in any case, Catherine called Birdy. I won't talk about it too long because clearly you have some thoughts on Lena Dunham, and I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about that. But I will say Catherine called Birdy, as I was mentioning before, as someone like Lena Dunham who is very contemporary, I was very curious how she would apply her style to this very, I think it's like 2090 is where it takes place, the film. It's definitely well outside the time range where she usually explores femininity and girlhood. And I think it just fits really well because it feels fresh in a way that's like, it's very clearly from her voice and her style, but she's also adapting work. I don't have the author's name off the top of my head, but the
author is Karen Cushman.
Okay, yeah. It just fits her style in that way where, every one of her films are about women at a certain pivotal changing point in their lives, trying and often clumsily trying to find themselves and their femininity, while also just kind of forging their own path, hoping to, find what their own sense of, let's see, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Independence, I guess, seems too, too obvious, but that's the only one I can really think of at the top of my head. And I don't know. I just think this movie is just really charming. It's very sweet. It's very funny, but it also just feels very personal and very, surprisingly, very crowd pleasing in a way that I feel like a lot of her other works have been a little bit more prickly, a little bit harder to get into. And I just really think it's a good turning point for Lena Dunham, and I'm very excited to see if this is where she's going to go with her future works, if she's going to try to do something kind of similar to Sharp Stick moving forward. But I think more people will like this than early estimates might predict. So I'm very excited to see what the response is, and I hope it provides more opportunities for Lena Dunham in the near future.
Well, I don't know if you saw it, but critics have liked it so far, at least.
Yeah.
And it's getting good reviews. And for me, sure, that's great for Lena Dunham, I guess. I mean, she's gotten applause before. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think she has to worry too much about people paying attention when she makes something. But I'm more happy for Bella Ramsey, who plays the main character. And I know you weren't really into Game of Thrones, but she was kind of a breakout hit star. Not even she wasn't like a star in the show, but she shows up in like one scene in season 6. I don't know how aware you are of her. But she just, she kills it in the show, and she's barely in it.
I was going to say, this was my introduction to her, because I didn't watch Game of Thrones, and I haven't seen anything as far as the Last of Us show that's coming up, the HBO, that she's going to be starring in with Pedro Pascal.
Yeah.
But I thought she's tremendous in this movie. I think it's definitely her performance that I think, in addition to Lena Dunham's writing and directing, that really carries this film and makes it very vibrant, very personal, very charming, and just weirdly very relatable, considering some of the turns the plot takes.
Bella Ramsey, she's the real deal. And I also saw that one of the other characters from Game of Thrones in this, or a couple characters actually, a couple actors.
I know Andrew
Ralph
Scott
Ineson,
from Fleabag's in it. But.
Well, yeah, but he's not in Game of Thrones. But Dean Charles Chapman is the one I was thinking of. He plays Tommen.
He's in it. Yeah, he has a funny role in it.
Fun little, reunion for some of these Game of Thrones actors.
Sure.
Which is going to become, it's always a thing. I always feel like when I see one Game of Thrones actor in something, I'd see maybe 2 more somewhere else. But anyway, you had another movie before we move on to the main one, the feature film. The big to-do.
I saw the Munsters, the Rob Zombie film. Which, have you seen any Rob Zombie movie? Do you have an opinion on Rob Zombie?
Any Rob Zombie movies?
Sure.
Will Ashton, I'm disappointed in you.
Okay.
have I seen any Rob Zombie movies.
You've seen Halloween, right? 27.
Of course, I've seen. We've talked about it. I don't even know who you are anymore, Will Ashton.
Okay.
I feel like you don't know me. I don't know you.
Well, remind me then what you've seen from him.
I haven't seen that much, but
Okay.
I've seen the 2 Halloween movies he did. Halloween,
Sure.
Halloween 2. Saw Lords of Salem. What else did he do? I think just one other one. I think it was Devil's Rejects, maybe.
Okay.
I think I saw
Probably,
it. Yeah, I saw
probably
that.
his most famous film.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say,
we were just kids back then, man. I was just in like middle high school.
Yeah. Rob Zombie, I mean, as a musician, I certainly find him very entertaining. I've seen him live before. He is a great showman. As a filmmaker, I find him kind of baffling but compelling. He, to date, I feel like hasn't really made a film that I can outright call good. But even though I've really disliked a couple of his films, like he made one called 31, which I think is just the pits. I wasn't really fond of House of a Thousand Corpses. I thought Haunted World of El Super Beasto is the type of film where I just kind of want to take a bath afterwards and not think about it again. But yeah, I mean, to your point, like you're saying, like Halloween 2007, second half, it's terrible. But the first half, even though it kind of pushes against some of the ambiguity that makes Michael Myers so innately terrifying as a protagonist, I find the film's desire to want to explore the nature versus nurture aspect of that character to be pretty fascinating in that film. And I think there's some really solid stuff in the first half of that film. Likewise, like you said, in Devil's Rejects.
Agree. The atmosphere is what makes that first half, I think.
Yeah.
Like that dread. Oof.
Right. Yeah, I just think it's, he goes, like any Rob Zombie film, I think he goes overboard. I think certainly some of the stuff that happens to Sherry Moon Zombie in that film, maybe is unwarranted, but
that movie lost me when what it did to Machete.
Oh, Machete.
Yeah, it made me sad.
Yeah. In any case, I don't know. I feel like he's kind of been like a close but no cigar filmmaker a few times. Like Devil's Rejects, the film that I like what it's doing. I certainly think it's a step forward for him after House of a Thousand Corpses, but I still feel like there's not a lot pushing him as a storyteller because, frankly, I think he just doesn't know how to write a script. It's something that I find very apparent in all of his films. He doesn't know how to write dialogue. He doesn't know how to structure a story. He doesn't know how to pace a film. He doesn't. And
hasn't he written all of his films? If you're not counting like the concert ones.
I don't know. Did he direct any concert films? I'm not familiar with those. Then
I think he did one. Okay. I remember it was years ago. I know it was like around when I moved to California, but I don't remember the name of it. But I think he did at least one.
Okay. In any case, Rob Zombie is a filmmaker who I think, as a screenwriter, certainly leaves a lot to be desired. But as a visual storyteller, he has undeniable style that makes me constantly willing to give him a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chance. And I think for the first time, that kind of paid off with the Munsters.
Jeez Louise.
And I say that because it's a complete reversal from what he's done before in the sense that it's a PG film. It's not him trying to emulate sort of the grimy 70s aesthetics that he was going for in his earlier films. Certainly, a lot of people point out that he tries to emulate the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is half true. I think the main film he tries to emulate is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Certainly kind of like the zaniness of that film.
Because wasn't Devil's Rejects like late 70s? Is when it takes place?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the focus of that film of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 being about like these kind of outsized weirdo hillbilly characters is certainly something that I think Rob Zombie loves, and he's been trying to emulate and recreate that with his films, obviously to not the same extent. But this movie, I mean, while it is pushing against that, it does share his love for just these sort of weirdo Halloween-friendly characters who just, are their own weird little guys, and they don't really fit into common society, but they're very much themselves. And in this case, it's a very romantic turn of events because the film, not so subtly as you watch it, becomes a kind of tribute to his wife, Sherry Moon Zombie, and the relationship that they had, and I think have had for 2 or 3 decades now. And, it proves to be a very personal and very sweet film, which is very unusual for films that are based on prominent IPs such as this one. So certainly has a lot going against it. Like I said, no structure, no sense of pacing to the film. It's very openly sort of hokey and hammy, and there's a lot of groan-worthy jokes throughout the film, but I don't know. I found it very endearing and oddly kind of sweet, and it's the first time I walked out of a Rob Zombie movie feeling charmed. So, can't take that for granted. I have to give it, an odd sort of begrudged, but nevertheless bemused thumbs up.
Well, Ashton, I hate to admit this, because I always want to level with you. I'm not a Munsters guy. Never was. Never liked the Munsters. I was always an Addams Family kid, and it's Pepsi versus Coke, right? I mean, part of me is sort of like, yeah, I could check this out, but the other part of me is like, how would I explain it to Wednesday? She'd throw me into a pool of piranhas if she found out. So therefore, I have no choice but to pretend this movie doesn't exist. I am very sorry.
I mean, it is fascinating and funny to me that this year through Netflix, both Rob Zombie and Tim Burton just kind of stopped beating around the bushes and just like, all right, fine. Rob Zombie is going to finally make the Munster movie. He, his biggest hit is Dragula. It's just kind of been like inevitable that he was going to do Munsters, through Netflix. He finally did. Now Tim Burton, they've been how many, Addams Family movies, and it's just like, and Tim Burton's been, flailing for like a decade as a director now. It's just like, will you just do Addams Family? He's like, fine. I'll do it if it's about Wendy. He's like, okay, fine. Yeah, do it. And now he's doing it. I hope that show's good. I'm excited for it, to be honest.
Yeah, same.
So, yeah, it is. I find that funny that, they're both just kind of like doing, these things that have been, not passion project. Well, certainly a passion project for Rob Zombie, but as far as Addams Family, just something that feels sort of inevitable for Tim Burton. Like, it's just been kind of a long delayed and long overdue project that he's just finally tackling, and hopefully with great results.
All right. Well, I guess is that our cue? Can we finally talk about Smile?
Yeah, sure.
I'm excited to talk about it because I'm kind of curious where we're both going to land on this one. I have the sense that you like it, so that's obviously good news for you. But what do I think? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Smile. We talked about it a little bit at the top of the show, but for those who skipped, this is a psychological horror film. And it is the feature directorial debut of Parker Finn. So he wrote and directed this. He did a short film a couple years back called Laura Hasn't Slept. And that is what this movie is based on. And it stars Sosie Bacon, who I don't know what you've seen her in. I think the last thing I saw her in was Mayor of Easttown. She had a kind of like secondary role in that show. Film-wise, I don't know if I've seen anything that she's been in. I don't know if you've seen anything. I think actually no. Charlie Says the Manson movie. I know she was in that, but other than that, I don't think anything else that I'm aware of. She's been in a bunch of shows that I've liked, and some shows that I hate. So she was in. I already mentioned Mayor of Easttown, but she was in 13 Reasons Why. Terrible show, garbage. I don't think you watched any of it, right?
Nope, I have not watched that show.
Okay, well, I'm actually really happy that 13 Reasons Why is in her rear window because she's the main character in this. I think she's quite good in it. And also in this movie, we have Jessie T. Usher from The Boys. We have Cal Penn, Rob Morgan, a couple other maybe familiar faces. And
I was going to say, a lot of TV actors in this.
A lot of TV actors. I mentioned Kyle Gallner as well from Veronica Mars. And I think Smallville too. But which is always fun. It's always fun to see your buddies, from the small screen. Judy Reyes from Scrubs. I don't know if I've ever seen Carla on the big screen before. About time.
Oh, she's been in some movies, but always in.
I think she has, but I don't know if I've seen her.
Yeah, that's fair.
I was
going to say, in addition to the casting director, obviously watching a lot of TV, I also like that some of these actors are just like playing parts that they've kind of already played before. Like, for instance, Cal Penn. It's like, well, you played a doctor before in House. Why don't you just play a doctor in this? And then you got, what's her name? Robin Weigert, who is like, obviously like the therapist in Big Little Lies. Just like, well, you were a pretty good therapist in that show.
That's right. Yeah. I knew I couldn't place her.
Really?
I was like, who is that? I know I've seen her somewhere. Yeah.
I find it so funny because her character in this is very, very similar to the therapist she played in Big Little Lies. The point was like, is this like a continued universe thing? Is Nicole Kidman gonna come in here?
Yeah,
I mean, I'd love to see those characters deal with the smile curse. Let's see what happens with that.
Yeah. But so this movie, I think like we kind of, again, we talked about it a bit on the top of the show, but the marketing has been based around kind of making this thing look a little bit more of like definitely like an unpretentious horror movie, like the kind of horror movie that's just like schlocky, like a silly premise, silly kind of thing, right? Because it's the smile. It's like when you see the smile and in the trailer, the kind of what happens, it's sort of like, okay, so this is one of those, like maybe not like Malignant weird, but it's going to be something kind of, like Lights Out or, huh?
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I mean, it's like, I call it like a sleepover kind of horror movie where it's like something you watch with like as a preteen, and like it's like 1 a.m. and you're like, let's watch something stupid. Let's watch Smile. And then like one person gets kind of scared and just like, oh, what's the matter? You scared of this already? It's like, no. And then
I feel like you're recounting something very specific and personal.
Maybe so. I don't know. In any case, the film that I think it reminds me the most of in that regard is The Ring. I think very clearly.
Well, I mean, I was going to get to it, Will Ashton. Sure. You're cutting ahead. You're cutting in line. Of course it reminds you of The Ring. It's going to remind everybody of The Ring, right? But, I mean, okay, so there are two main movies I think people are going to compare this to. Like you said, The Ring and It Follows. And two very different movies, but they kind of have, like, similar hooks, right? The hook of, like, something traumatic that can get passed on, and the main character tries to figure out a way to thwart it, right? So both movies kind of operate that, but they're atmospherically and motif and mood wise, they're completely different films, right? Because The Ring does not take itself that seriously. It kind of does, but it doesn't. And It Follows does take itself very serious. It Follows is very like contemplative, and there's a lot of like substance right underneath it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you say that, but I feel like, I just watched Ringu, the original Ring, and that really takes itself pretty seriously. But yeah, the Gore
we're not talking about
one,
Ringu.
Yeah, sorry. The Gore Verbinski one is a little bit, I guess, a little bit hammier in a good way, comparatively.
I would say so. I mean, considering that like first, image of like the first victim of the Ring, I'll never forget her, like when she's in like that closet or whatever. But Smile, I feel like this stuff is on a spectrum, right? I feel like Smile is like right in the center. Like half of it is It Follows, kind of, in form and function, and the other half is The Ring, where it's just fun. Okay, and the movie itself is about kind of what I said. This woman, she's a therapist, again, Sosie Bacon's character, and she witnesses this suicide that happens right in front of her, and it traumatizes her, and she starts to like hallucinate. She's just like seeing things, like creepy things are happening to her. So very much like The Ring, very much like something maybe even Drag Me to Hell, and eventually she starts to catch on that like, okay, what happened to this person who committed suicide in front of me is going to happen to me, because it happened to the person before her. But the problem is that nobody believes her. People are just sort of like, okay, like you're obviously like losing your mind. And she's just like, what am I going to do? And I will say, I want to know what your audience was like, Will, because my audience was perfect. No notes. People were disruptive. People were talking throughout, and we all had fun. We all had like this silent agreement at the beginning of the movie. It was like, you know what? It's Sunday afternoon. I just got home from this, and we're all just going to have a good time. The Smile. And it was fantastic. I want to know what your audience was like, but mine was just like every moment of this movie, people were commenting, be like, oh, you know what it is. Whenever somebody was smiling, like chuckles, murmurs. I laughed so many times in this movie. You would have thought it was a comedy. And yet it's not a movie. It's a movie that kind of takes itself a bit seriously too. It's not like a super, like it's wacky fun time. It's not Drag Me to Hell, but okay.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly have some comments as far as that regarding the tone. But audience-wise, okay, so I saw this at a screening. It was a press screening, but they invited general audiences as well. I remember the reception. For the first half of it, everyone was kind of respectful. Like, they were kind of keeping their comments to themselves. Everyone was just kind of watching it. Like, I mean, there's like a lot of like kind of weird murmurs of reactions throughout, but like generally everyone was just kind of respecting, everyone's viewing experience. But I forget exactly where it was. I think at a certain scene in the hospital where just a lot of crazy shenanigans start to happen. And that was kind of the breaking point where everyone's just like started kind of laughing and like getting uproarious with what was going on. And from that point, it's off the races. Everyone was just kind of like either laughing or just, voicing their comments or what have you. But like that scene was kind of the breaking point, I remember, for, people commenting on things, even to the point where I felt like they're kind of being a little disrespectful to kind of some of the more serious moments that happened, towards the third act of the film.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that toward the end here, because there is like maybe after we play the Rotten Tomatoes game, I kind of want to address something that happens in the end, but obviously don't want to give it away or spoil anything. But for now,
oh boy,
for now, what I'll say about this movie, I think it's scary, it's creepy. I like the imagery. Most of the jump scares work pretty well. I have mostly good things to say about this one. I had fun with it. I thought the underlying message, it was a little bit on the nose. I mean, I don't know. It's just, there are a lot of scenes where they're just spelling it out. I can tell it's a first film in the sense that it's a very familiar structure. Not a lot of risk taking in that sense, which is okay. I think that Parker Finn's still getting his sea legs probably. And on that token too, I kind of think this movie repeats too many of the same beats. So I think I have two fundamental issues with this movie that kind of hold it back for me. One is that it keeps doing like the same kind of thing where she's like, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Bad thing. And then like somebody like snaps her out of it. And then she's just like, oh no, what's happening? And they're like, are you okay? That same thing happens like 5 times. And at a certain point, it's like you expect her to mix it up or to try a different like approach to, addressing this or to try to adapt to what's going on. You could argue she eventually does, but yeah, it takes a while. And the other thing that frustrates me a lot is just this character just makes a lot of dumb decisions. Like the way that she's trying to explain what's going on to her. I think that I feel like she could have been more clever or, I was thinking of 10 Cloverfield Lane. Like one thing I like about that movie is that the main character is always ahead of the audience. And I always felt I was ahead of this main character. And I guess you could argue it's like, well, she's going through, she's stressed out, she's traumatized, she's not thinking clearly. I think that's all fine, but it also means that I'm going to struggle a bit, like really connecting with this main character in the best way possible. So it's not a mixed bag. I think it's better than it's not. But yeah, those were just two fundamental issues that I was struggling with for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I find this movie kind of fascinating as far as where it's coming out in the genre as it stands now, because, I mean, we're at a point, and obviously this isn't indicative of every horror movie, but there's this broader sort of A24 influence where the quote-unquote elevated horror movies are kind of taking precedent right now. Or they're sort of like high-concept movies that are portrayed either in a very kind of ironic or self-aware sort of way. Certainly some of the better examples have come from Jordan Peele, but some other filmmakers who are trying to emulate that, I think, I feel like they kind of forget that like a movie like this can kind of play to convention while also being smarter than it looks. And I think that I appreciate that Parker Finn is able to acknowledge just kind of how silly the concept is and just kind of not try to play against it too much, like not try to like act like it's, like he's above it in any particular respect. But I think he gives it a little bit more craftsmanship than someone who would just lazily kind of coast on the concept of it. And above that, I mean, the central theme of the film is something that has been well tried ground in horror movies of late, which is grief and trauma. And I know you like to comment that pretty much every horror movie right now is about grief or trauma in some respect or another. And I kind of appreciate this movie seems to be kind of commenting on the fact that a lot of movies are about grief and trauma right now by, in some respects doing things a little bit better than some other horror movies. It shows some of the reasons why this character is traumatized in a way that I think, broadly speaking, feels pretty respectful. It doesn't feel like exploitative. I think, some of the bigger moments are pretty well handled. I mean, it kind of verges into that territory, but I think it handles it pretty well, but also, doesn't let it overtake the film or slow it down too much. Outside of, the fact that the film, pacing wise, is kind of slow to begin with, not in a bad way. Like it just kind of takes its time with the reveals and with the jump scares and all that jazz. But I agree with you that I think maybe it relies too much on conventional jump scares in the sense that because like kind of thing where it's just like a character's looking at something and then there's someone over his shoulder and it's like jump scare and it's like, okay, fine. But like you already have this kind of creepy imagery already with like the smiles and stuff like that. And I feel like you could have relied a little bit more on that as opposed to just like someone's in the woods or like, creepy thing is coming out now or like someone knocked on the door or whatever, so, stuff like that. I feel is kind of, a little basic. I feel like you can kind of push away from that. But, I had a good time.
Sure. Creepiest thing for me is that the main character who, by all accounts, is in her maybe mid to late 20s, not just owns a landline, but uses it a lot.
I think they mentioned she's 30.
That was weird to me.
I'm pretty sure they mentioned that she's 30.
You know what? Maybe she is. Well, who am I to question it? But yeah, so I know people get frustrated with the term elevated horror because they say it's like, it kind of implies that like it's elevated above like other horror movies. And that could be a bit reductive. I think it's like a different kind of enjoyment you can get out of horror movies that isn't better or worse than what you can get out of other kinds of horror movies. It's like, it when you see it kind of thing. And I think, we've always had films that are like, if you want to call it cerebral horror, where the emphasis is just on a different like part of your brain that enjoys things. I think is like they're trying to be about something, and we've always that's been a thing with horror movies as long as horror movies have existed. Psycho, The Shining, like these movies were always like about something. But to what you were saying, it's like the A24 thing. There is like a specific indie mental health is the root of all horror movies kind of thing going on here that's been way more pronounced since movies like I think The Babadook was one of the first ones to really kind of get that going. You mentioned where you allude, I don't know if you mentioned Hereditary, but I think you alluded right to like Hereditary, and which is very much about grief. Midsummer, which is about like grief and getting over a breakup. But movies like The Witch, I think some people would, Goodnight Mommy, which got its remake, and there's stuff like Lighthouse and Suspiria, and It Follows. It Follows, which I think is my favorite, like one of my favorite horror movies in general. And I think that like this kind of thing, like this kind of horror movie, it's kind of petered out a little bit. Like I think like we still get them, like that kind of aesthetic. Like Sundance is chock full of them, but they aren't getting as much attention, it feels like, as they used to. The big buzzy ones are like Malignant or Barbarian, but Speak No Evil was kind of in that zone, wasn't it? And it didn't really take. And I mean, there might have been like 2 or 3 others that hit at Sundance and South by, and I'm blanking on them, honestly.
Nah, Speak No Evil is no, that's like kind of more of like a Haneke kind of funny.
Is it? Okay, I didn't see it, to be clear. So
right.
I'm just kind of,
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Barbarian, because I think that's another film where, yeah, like you said, like this malignant sort of train where horror movies now are kind of willing themselves to push themselves into like that kind of, B genre exploitation kind of thing, like not trying to exclusively just be like, hey, we're a movie that's solely about something and kind of coasting on the themes. Like it's allowing itself to be entertaining and pulpy and silly. And I certainly think that is worthwhile and worth exploring. I was going to say, for
Men.
me,
A20, Alex Garland's Men. That was the one I was like, I knew there was another one. Sorry.
But I was going to say, yeah, if Barbarian is this year's Malignant, I was going to say this movie, Smile, is this year's The Empty Man, which I don't think you ever got around to seeing.
No, I
That's
didn't.
another film where, kind of an underdog hit as far as the critical reception is concerned, because that's another film where it's like, it's a directorial debut and it has a really kind of dumb title and a goofy premise, but you're like, how's that going to be any good? But then you watch it and you realize the level of like patience and care that goes into it, and how that movie kind of explores depression and grief in different ways. And, despite kind of the dumb title that is attached to that film, that's also a film that, coasts on the craftsmanship and the well-directed filmmaking there. And I think that's kind of similar to this film. Like, I think a lesser filmmaker would just made a kind of schlocky, dumb movie. And this is, it has schlocky tendencies, but I think it's overall a pretty well-directed, thoughtful, engaging film that is able to be entertaining. But it's also, it's saying stuff without letting the saying stuff things have a sort of air, a pompous air of like superiority. It's just like, it's not letting, yeah.
And it's not like, it's not preachy, and it's not saying anything that different, like, I don't know. There was nothing I thought that was that poignant. It was all stuff that I was like, yeah, like it felt a little bit like pop psychology to me, which is okay. It doesn't have to be that like subversive or anything. I think like what you said there about like schlocky tendencies, I think that's exactly right, because one of the reasons I think this movie works as well as it does is Sosie Bacon just really, really sells it. In her performance, it could have been so easy for her to really just like go down a different path with this character where she's almost sort of like winking at the camera, and there's none of that. Her reactions are genuine. She's like seriously terrified by what's happening to her, and she's scrambling for answers and scrambling to deal with it. And as she kind of like deteriorates over the film, it's heart-wrenching to watch. Like, there's so much sympathy that she like is able to, I think, extract from the audience. And it's so bizarre because like I think a lot of people might look at that and be like, the tone is just so off. But for whatever reason, it's like a weird magic trick. I think like the tone actually, it's almost like we get to like breathe a sigh of relief once in a while by laughing at it, right? Or not laughing at it, but just like laughing at the absurdity of the whole thing. And it's like the movie is in on the joke, but it's also in on the serious part of like what it's trying to say. It's very interesting, like case study in balancing two very disjointed things. And I think in other movies would people would be like, oh, it's so jarring, And
right.
In this case, I didn't feel that.
No, I agree. And I think that's another lesson that they learned from The Ring, the American one. Because, you have Naomi Watts in that film, and she's coming off of Mulholland Drive, like only a couple years before that. And, that's another film, it's her performance that really helps carry that in addition to David Lynch's directing. But, like a lesser actress in that film, in the original, or the remake of The Ring, might not have been able to sell it. But she, brings that gravitas I think you're referring to there.
Yeah, gravitas is it.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing is like, there are too many movies these days. I think we're coming out of the 2010s, and I think one of the things we're still seeing lingering effects of is like actors undercutting the gravitas of their performance with quips and jokes of like, screenwriters thinking that's how I lighten the mood. That's how I make you like the characters. Like they kind of have to be like, no, we know that this movie exists and this movie exists. So here's like a little moment to be like, I know what the Babadook is. I'm not taking a shot at Scream because that's the point of Scream. Right. But I'm thinking of other stuff, where it's just like you'll watch a movie and it's like all the tension gets cut because it's like, okay, I see where the screenwriter came in and was like, well, we got to, I'm not even calling out Nope because I feel like Nope kind of does it, but in a great way.
You're talking about like a Max Landis movie.
I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw a Max Landis movie. It's been a while.
I don't know,
right?
But that's like, yeah, sure. I don't know. I'm just saying that like where the screenwriter gets a little too cocky about like, oh, I've seen a movie before, and I know the audience has seen a movie before, so we
see it a lot. I'm seeing it more in TV stuff right now, but yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that this movie is able to, like I said, kind of lean into the genre tropes, but not like act like, it doesn't have to just rely on those in the concept. It is saying things like, not terribly profound things, but at least it's willing to do that in a way that's not sacrificing the entertainment level. I guess for me, where I kind of take maybe issue with the film and something I wanted to discuss is how it kind of deals with depression.
Yeah. Me too. It's unfortunate.
Which I don't know. I mean, that was my issue with Lights Out. I don't know where you landed on that film, but I think lights out. For all the dread and some of the well-crafted scenes in that movie, I think that movie is kind of abhorrent by the end, because that movie takes a stance that on depression, suicide, that I think is highly irresponsible.
I totally agree. No, I couldn't agree more. And I am at the same time a little bit conflicted, because I do think it's a hard thing to solve. But let's talk about that after we play the game.
Sure.
And I don't have anything else for Smile. I think
Yeah.
I kind of covered how I feel. I can see why this is as successful as it is, and I'm impressed for a movie that is like this. It's not that original. Like, it's definitely one of those movies you're going to watch and be like, all these other movies, But I think it's okay in the horror tradition. I think we tend to cut a little bit more slack, because horror movies do have more of a symbiotic relationship with each other than I think a lot of other genres do. And I have more fun with that sort of thing. I don't get as easily annoyed by like, that's just this mashed up with this, as much as I would with like a superhero movie, maybe. Or, I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah.
I guess it just kind of depends. But with this movie, it didn't really bother me that much, I'll say.
All right, well, let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game so that we can spoil this thing without... we won't spoil it right now, but we'll play the Rotten Tomatoes game and then we'll spoil it. But okay.
Yeah.
Smile. Rotten Tomatoes.
I'm very curious about what the score for this one might be.
I'm curious if you're going to nail it.
I mean, I think it's fresh. I'm starting broad. I think it's in the fresh category.
Well, I didn't tell you how many reviews yet. So
okay.
We have 121 reviews counted. So you're looking at like what's pretty close to consensus.
I don't know. I feel like it's not 80 or above. Like, it might be close, but I feel like it's not that high. But I feel like it's, maybe not certified fresh, but certainly fresh. I'm gonna say 76%.
Well, this is why you're the king. This is why the reasoning is there. And as you were saying, and I was like, Will's going to be he's going to get it like 1 or 2 away. And sure enough, you were only 1 off.
Okay.
Right. So it's not 76. Do you think it's 75 or 77?
It's a good question. I'm going to say
Making
75.
it interesting.
Is it 75?
75? You did it, Will Ashton. So proud of you. It is 75%. And I think, you nailed it. I think, some people are taking a look at Smile and they're frowning, right? But most people, they're smiling right along with it. Right. And let's look at the audience scores. We have 500 plus verified ratings. What do you think, Will? Where do you think the audiences are?
Yeah, again, kind of tricky, because I feel like audiences are responding to it, but I can see some people laughing at it for the wrong reasons and being like, that was stupid. And it's like, they think because of that it's dumb and therefore a bad film. But I don't think it's going to make it negative, and I don't think that's even going to make the response divided. I just think it might be, maybe not as high as some of its contemporaries as far as other horror movies that came out this year. So I'm going to say 78%.
Only 2 away this time.
Okay.
You're having a good week. I'm impressed. It's 80%. Okay. So, 80%. So it's a little bit higher, but you had the right. You were on the right track. Now, what about Cinema Score? What do you think of that one?
Okay, I think I was spoiled on this one. This is a B-, right?
Yeah, and I am shocked, like genuinely shocked. I don't know if I've ever seen this much of noticed this much of a disconnect between the audience score, the critic score, and the cinema score. Because usually I feel like the cinema score is going to align with like one of them. Usually the audience score, or be a little bit closer, because like 80%. I mean, that's like at least an A-, kind of if you're trying to track along. But B-, that's low. That's really low for a cinema score.
I think people are kind of turned off by the third act. Maybe it's me being presumptuous, but I feel like people are like really strong in the first 2 acts, and then like the third one gets kind of silly in a way that people are like, I don't know about that.
Sure.
I mean, I have my complaints about the third act, but I don't think they're like general audience complaints.
Well, I mean, I think to your point, I think Cinema Score is geared around a little bit more like, would you recommend it? And so they base it around that kind of thing. And I could see people being like, I don't know if I would recommend it, even if they liked it, because they might feel a little bit like it's a little irresponsible, considering. But I
don't know.
Who knows? I'm just guessing.
I don't think audiences are really thinking that way. I just think they're kind of like, man, it gets kind of stupid by the end.
Okay. All right. Well, what about on Letterboxd? So we have 27,000 views so far, which is, pretty much on par, pretty average. What do you think, though, the average rating is from 0 to 5?
3.6.
You're not as close as you've been, but you're not that far. It's a 3.2. It's a little bit lower. I think the Letterboxd crowd is being a little bit harsher, but that's what happens. Few friends of the show. I think like I saw Aaron Dicer's a 2.5. He wasn't as into it, and I have a feeling for reasons that we might get into here in a sec. But I don't see Chris Evangelista, another friend of the show. He just put it down as watch. I don't know if he liked it. So
he has a review on Rotten Tomatoes. I think he was negative. I think he called it cliched and derivative or something like that.
Well, he's not wrong technically. So there you go. That is Smile. From this point on, we're going to talk about the ending of Smile. So if you haven't seen the movie, you don't want to get spoiled, this is it. We'll see come back later. Bros is coming out. We'll release that review on the feed here in a day or two. So check that out when you can.
Bye.
But for now, Will Ashton, go ahead.
No, I was saying if they're leaving for the spoilers, I just said bye.
Okay.
Bye, man. Different horror movie.
Yeah. It's like, where are you going with that? All right.
Yeah.
That's fine. Smile.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I didn't see it coming, right?
Well, sure.
I mean, it's pretty clear. It's like, okay, yeah, like it's not over. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. I mean, I think that the initial reaction I think people are going to have is just like, oh, even if you come to terms with your trauma and you confide in somebody and you acknowledge, the pain and because it's saying all along, right? It's like the problem for her is that she's not being honest about what she went through and acknowledging her guilt in the situation and all that stuff. And so then the movie's just sort of like, well, you can do that, but you'll still die. I don't know. I could see here's what I'm thinking, and I don't know what you're gonna. I could maybe see somebody looking at that and first of all being like, well, it's horror. Like horror always does this kind of thing. I could see somebody being like, yeah, but Drag Me to Hell does the same kind of thing, right? But on that token, I think Drag Me to Hell doesn't have that same kind of message. And also that main character doesn't have her Groundhog's Day like affirmation arc, does she? Like she just kind of thinks that she wins and then she doesn't.
I mean, well, ultimately with the Drag Me to Hell, she made a mistake or she did a bad thing. She made the bad choice, so she was punished for it. In this movie, the character didn't really make a bad choice from the get-go. Like she, suffers from this horrific trauma, and then she was trying to do her job, and then she got this curse passed on to her. So it's like, I don't think the character needs to be punished for that. But
right.
I was going to say, well, before I get ahead of myself, I will say, I don't think this ending is as irresponsible as Lights Out. I think Lights Out... Spoiler for that movie too, I guess. That movie is just like, I know how I can kill the entity. I'll kill myself, and that'll get everyone's problems away. It's like that's highly irresponsible.
Yeah, and I thought that's what they were going to do here, and I was like, oh no, please don't, no.
Right, because there's a moment where it's like, oh god, are they going to do that? Please don't. And then they have an ending that's like, well, it's kind of cheesy, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. I kind of prefer that over like they have a clean cut ending where it's like normally that annoys me and was like, yeah, I don't know, for this movie I kind of like if it does have kind of a clean happy ending, and then it's just like psych, that's not the real ending. We're back at ground zero and it's like Marilyn Manson's here and he's gonna eat this lady, and it's like, all right. I get it because it's a hard problem to solve, right? Because I feel like you write yourself into a corner when this entity is basically unstoppable. And you have to really kind of like write a way out of it that I think is really tough to do without the movie feeling really false. Like I feel like you'd have to rewrite it in a way where like she finds clues to like an alternate path, or she thinks of it at different angles. Like, well, maybe I don't have to murder somebody. Maybe there's some other way that I can break the chain, that she uses the information and adapts. But instead, I think she kind of does that. She's sort of like, oh, if I go to the house and then I don't see, if I just like isolate myself, but she does it without a plan. And like she's just kind of like, I'm just gonna sit in here. Like, what are you doing? Yeah,
girl.
I mean, if she passes on to someone else, just like that's just literally the ending of The Ring, basically, right?
Well, yeah, but I feel like the end of The Ring, she figures out that if she, copies the tape, like she investigates the situation and she like figures out a way to save herself and her son, right? But then it kind of does it. It cuts it both ways, right? Because it still passes on to the other guy.
Right.
Sorry, we spoiled The Ring for
sorry.
people.
Yeah, well, this is spoiler section, you know, so all
Yeah,
bets
but
are
spoilers. We said spoilers for Smile, not The Ring.
All right.
But okay.
Well, I spoiled Lights Out, so all bets
That's
are
true.
off now.
That's true.
In any case, what I was gonna say is I think
I'll
this
spoil
has
It Follows too in a second, but go ahead.
Well, I was just about to bring up It Follows because
Okay.
I feel like, you know, I can see why that's one of your favorite horror movies. I like the movie a lot, but I think that's a movie that has two brilliant first acts, and then there's a clear point where what's the guy's name? Is it David Robert Mitchell? Is that the writer director of that film? He's like, I can just feel him at his computer. It's like an adaptation moment where it's just like, well, where do I go from here? It's just like, how do I stop an unstoppable entity? And they come up with this kind of weird like pool scenario, like, you know, it's like,
yeah, but it doesn't work.
Sure. To my point, what I was going to say is just I just feel like the third act of the movie, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I just feel like that's a movie where it's just like they never really figured out exactly.
No, I think it's brilliant. I think the point of it is it gets a dumb idea, but it's one that you can imagine teenagers coming up with that and thinking like, well, let's just try to kill this thing using electricity or like to trap it, right? Mm-hmm. And then the movie is about like the futility of that. It's like, well, you can't kill this thing, you know. It's like fair. If the metaphor sticks, and then like the ending ends up being that like you have to share, you know, like you have to find somebody who is able to share the trauma with you and to share the burden with you and learn to live with it. And I that's why I think It Follows is basically like, I think the ending is perfect for what it's trying to do.
All right, maybe I do need to just rewatch it then because it's been a while since I've seen it, and I love the ending of Under the Silver Lake.
That's a great ending. And I, to be fair, It Follows I've seen multiple times. I really genuinely love it, and
it's a good movie.
Yeah, and you know, I think with Smile, it's like I'm glad that it didn't at least it is a derivative film, like Chris Evangelista said, but I am at least glad that like it didn't steal from It Follows, because I was worried it was going to do that, where she was going to find some way to like loop it so that it was like her and the detective guy basically being the same characters from It Follows, like kind of like passing it back and forth so nobody else has to deal with it. So you can't break the chain, but you can, you know, take responsibility to it. But I think that wouldn't have worked. I don't think that the movie's about that, right? So it's like the themes don't connect, and it would have been derivative of It Follows, and it would have been unsatisfying. So it's a hard problem to solve. I don't know what to do.
Well, I looked it up just to be sure. I guess he said both creepy and derivative. Sorry, I misquoted him. So sorry, Chris, if you're listening. But yeah, no, I agree. I again, I guess where I come down to is like I want to criticize it more, but also like if I'm Parker Finn and I'm writing this movie, I don't really know where to end it. Like that, the ending, I guess, from a screenwriter standpoint, makes sense, but it also just kind of feels underwhelming at the same time. Just like, well, okay. Like, I mean, that is an ending. I just feel like it's like, I feel like this is like the ending you get like on the alternative ending, like on the DVD. And it's just like the better ending is in the film. And then you watch that and it's like, well, I can see why they wanted to end it that way. But it's like, I feel like that's a less satisfying ending than like something a little bit more conclusive. Yeah. And I just feel like, I don't know what that other ending would be because this is the version we got.
Agreed. So it's not our job to decide, right? But, yeah, I mean, I'm just glad I was able to get my thoughts out on that, and it didn't ruin the movie for me. But yeah, I think we're pretty aligned on it. So online on like where we landed.
Yeah, I just feel like if it had nailed the ending, I'd be like, this is a good movie. And I feel like right now I'm like, this is a pretty good movie, pretty good.
Yeah, it's almost there. Okay, so that is Smile. Again, we'll be talking about Bros next, and yeah, keep your eyes out, keep your ears and eyes ready for that review. But did you have one more thing?
Oh, just because I didn't get to mention it in my review. First, like the cold open of this movie is awesome. I think it's probably the best scene in the movie. Yeah, I was just going to say I think that is a really, really solid opening for the film. And I'm just like, hot damn, this is good stuff. Weird.
There were a couple of scenes where it was like the Dutch angle was like really tweaking. And I was like, well, what's the purpose of that? Okay, sure.
Whatever. I'm not opposed. I don't know.
You do what you want.
It gives me that Raimi tingle for a little bit, and I'm like,
okay,
whatever.
Okay. I was like, is Branagh directing this? Okay. All right. That's Smile.
Yeah.
We'll see you all on the next one from Internet California. I'm John Negroni.
And for Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.